When the envelope arrived, I didn't open it right away. It sat there on the kitchen table like it weighed 1,000 pounds, thick and yellowed and slightly creased from its journey through the postal system, as if even the envelope knew that what was inside would reshape the balance of my family. It had my full name on it, my legal name, printed carefully by the lawyer who'd handled my grandfather's estate, and I stared at it for a while before I peeled it open, half expecting it to vanish into smoke and dust the second I touched it. Inside was a letter with stiff, formal language and a check with more zeros than I'd ever seen in my life. My grandfather had left me his savings, not everything, not the house or the land, but a substantial sum of money he'd been quietly collecting over the years. I remembered him as a man of few words and quiet hands who watched football with a furrowed brow and always kept peppermints in the pockets of his jackets. He'd never said he was leaving me anything. He barely said anything at all. I cried in the silence of my small apartment, overwhelmed by the gesture. It wasn't just the money. It was the thought of him, remembering me specifically, choosing me. Out of all of us, he'd picked me. I don't know why. Maybe because I used to sit with him in the evenings and read books aloud when my parents dropped me off for weekends. Maybe because I never asked for anything, not even when I needed it. Maybe because he saw something in me that no one else ever really had. I didn't know, and there was no one left to ask. I thought about keeping it. God knows I needed it. Rent was a constant shadow hanging over my shoulder, and student loans had a way of curling themselves into my dreams at night, suffocating any thought of peace. But then I thought about my parents, about the way my father's shoulders had started to sag under the weight of age, about how my mother still worked weekends at the diner even though her knees ached and she winced every time she bent to pick up a fallen napkin. They had given everything they could to raise me and my brother, and still they struggled, scraping by on pride and determination. So I made the call. I told them about the money, told them it wasn't everything, but it was enough, told them I wanted them to have it. My mother cried so hard she had to pass the phone to my father, who could barely say thank you without his voice cracking. I felt light afterward, lighter than I had in months. There was no regret, not then. I imagined them fixing up the house, paying off old debts, maybe finally getting the roof redone after that storm that had torn through last spring. I imagined them breathing again, just breathing. A week later, I called to check in. My mother sounded cheerful, buoyant even, and told me she and Dad had talked and they decided it would be best used for something joyful. She said it like a blessing. I didn't understand at first. She kept mentioning my brother, Daniel, and how stressed he'd been, how he deserved a break after everything he's been through. I asked what they meant. She laughed, that breathless kind of nervous laugh she always made when she was trying to soften something sharp. "We booked him a trip," she said. "To Europe. He's going with some friends. It's good for him. He needs it." My heart stopped. I felt it, actually felt it, just skip in my chest, like it was too stunned to keep beating. A trip to Europe with my inheritance? I tried to keep my voice calm. I tried to sound understanding. "All of it?" I asked. "You used all of it?" There was a pause. Too long. And then my mother said, "Most of it, yes. He's flying business class, and you know how expensive those kinds of things are last minute. But he'll be back before the summer's over." I don't know what I said next. I honestly can't remember. I think I mumbled something about being tired, about needing to go, and I hung up. The silence that followed was deafening. It crawled into my ears and stayed there, humming softly, like disappointment given shape. Daniel. Of course it was Daniel. He'd always been the golden boy, the charmed one, the one who got into trouble and got bailed out, who crashed cars and got new ones, who flunked classes and still ended up with a job through one of Dad's connections. I was the careful one, the quiet one, the invisible scaffolding that held up the family without ever being seen. And now, even my inheritance, my one piece of something that was just mine, had gone to him. I sat on the edge of my bed that night and stared out the window. The city buzzed below, lights flickering, life continuing. Somewhere across the ocean, my brother was probably toasting with champagne in some sleek, unfamiliar hotel, completely unaware of the weight he carried in his suitcase, The weight of what I had given up and what had been taken from me. And for the first time in years, I didn't know who I was to them. Not really. The days that followed were blurry and strange, like living inside someone else's life. I went to work, nodded when people spoke to me, smiled when it felt required. But inside, there was this quiet, gnawing emptiness. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. Not my friends, not my coworkers. It felt too personal, too shameful, almost like an embarrassment I had brought on myself. I had given something precious away, and my family had handed it to someone else like it was a flyer on the street, something disposable. I started checking Daniel's social media in a way that made me feel sick. I hated it, but I couldn't stop. There he was, arms stretched out in front of the Eiffel Tower. There he was, smiling beside fountains in Rome, lounging by a turquoise pool in Mykonos, his face tanned and carefree. He looked radiant, like someone who had never known a single moment of restraint. The captions were full of joy. "Much needed escape," he wrote under one photo. "Thanks to my amazing parents," under another. That one nearly did me in. I stared at the words, blinking, heart hammering. Thanks to my amazing parents. No mention of me, not a hint of acknowledgement. I wondered if they had even told him. If they'd sat him down and said, "Your sister gave us this money, and we want to use it for you." Or if they had simply made it sound like something they'd managed to pull together themselves. Knowing them, knowing how they always protected him, always shielded him from every hard truth, I figured they probably never said a word. A part of me wanted to call, to scream, to ask them how they could do this to me. But what would I even say? I imagined the conversation 100 times. "You took what wasn't yours. You gave away something that was meant for me. Do you even see me?" The words bounced inside my skull like trapped birds, flapping and panicked and useless. Instead, I went silent. I stopped calling. I stopped replying to texts. I let their messages sit unread, their voicemails unheard. My mother texted me a photo of a new garden bench she'd bought with the little we had left, and wrote that it looked so peaceful under the maple tree, and she hoped I was doing well. I didn't respond. My father left a voicemail telling me they missed me. My brother didn't call at all. The silence became its own kind of refuge, a place where I didn't have to pretend I was okay. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done in years. Pages filled with raw, cracked thoughts, grief, anger, betrayal. I wrote until my hand ached, until the ink smudged from my tears. I wrote until I started to remember myself, who I was before the money, before the disappointment, before I let their love convince me to give up something I should have held on to. I remembered the nights I stayed up late to study while Daniel partied. I remembered working 2 jobs in college while he spent his spring breaks on ski trips. I remembered calling home, exhausted and broke, and hearing my mother say she'd have to ask Dad before they could send anything. I remembered all the times I was told, "He just needs a little more support right now," as if I never did. I started to realize that this wasn't a one-time thing. It was the final note in a song that had been playing for years. I'd always been the background harmony, and Daniel was the melody. He was the one they clapped for. I was just there. One night, I opened my grandfather's letter again. I tucked it into a drawer, but I pulled it out and read it slowly this time. His handwriting was shaky but deliberate. He'd written, "You've always been the steady one. I know you'll make good choices. I trust you." There was no flourish, no poetry, just quiet faith in who I was. I wept then, not because I had lost the money, but because I had lost something much harder to name. I had lost the illusion that love in our family was equal, that it moved like water in every direction. The truth was, love had always flowed around Daniel like a river, carving out paths for him, smoothing his stones. And I had always been the damn. But I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I had been. What I felt now was colder, sadder, a kind of grief that doesn't shout, it just settles in your bones. I made a decision the next morning. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't write a dramatic message or send a bitter email. I just started. I applied for a different apartment, something smaller, but in a part of town that felt like a new beginning. I canceled my phone plan and got a new number. I gave notice at work and started looking for jobs in another city, somewhere far, somewhere that didn't hold the shape of them in its streets. I wasn't running away. I was just finally choosing myself. Moving wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a movie montage with upbeat music and smiling friends helping carry boxes. It was me, alone, wrapping my life in old newspapers and cardboard, wondering how it had all ended up here. This quiet severing, this careful, intentional escape. I found a studio apartment in a small coastal city, a place with wind in the air and strangers in every direction. It was the kind of place where no one knew my story, where I could walk for hours and pass people who would never ask about my family or the money or what I'd given up. The silence there was different. Not heavy like it had been in my old apartment, but clean. Empty in a freeing kind of way. The first night, I sat on the floor, no furniture yet, just a blanket and a half-eaten sandwich, and listened to the waves pounding in the distance like a promise. I felt something shift in me. Small, but unmistakable. I had left. I had made it out. And even though the sadness still wrapped around my ribs like ivy, I could breathe. A week passed. Then 2. I got a job at a local bookstore. Nothing fancy, but the hours were steady and the work felt grounding. I shelved novels and chatted with customers and began learning the rhythms of a new place. No one asked me where I came from. No one knew who Daniel was. I didn't have to talk about my parents or my grandfather or the check that had vanished like it was never mine. I was just me, quiet, kind, reliable me. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. Then came the email. It popped into my inbox one morning while I was sipping weak coffee and waiting for the shop to open. The subject line was just my name, sent from my mother's address. My heart clenched before I even clicked it, a lifetime of emotional muscle memory jolting awake in an instant. I hesitated, finger hovering, part of me screaming to delete it, and never look back. But I opened it. It was long, longer than anything she'd ever written to me. She said they'd noticed my silence, how I'd stopped responding, how my number didn't work anymore. She said it hurt, that they missed me, that they hadn't realized what the inheritance had meant to me. Not really, and they were sorry. She wrote that Daniel hadn't known the money came from me, that they hadn't told him. They just thought he needed it more at the time, that he was struggling with things they hadn't told me about. She didn't explain what those things were. She didn't say why my struggle had never counted. She ended the letter with, "Please call us. We want to make it right." I read it 3 times. I wanted to feel relief. I wanted it to patch something inside me. But instead, I felt tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep can fix, the kind that sinks into your bones, the kind that comes from years of being unseen. I didn't call. Not that day, not the next, but I started writing back. Not a reply to the email. Not yet. Just pages. In my journal, pages of all the things I'd never said out loud, the way it felt to be passed over. The way it felt to give freely and watch what you gave be used for someone else's joy while you sat in the shadow of your own sacrifice. I wrote about birthday parties where Daniel got bikes and video games and I got sweaters and soft praise. I wrote about college nights where I cried in the dark because I didn't have enough to eat, and how they said they were tight on money while sending Daniel new clothes for his first job interview. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the pattern, the story. The way I had always been cast in the role of the giver, the quiet one, the one who holds things together with invisible thread and never asks for anything in return. And now I was finally asking, not for them to give me anything, but for them to see me, to really, truly see me. Eventually, I did respond. I told them I was safe. I told them I had moved. I told them I didn't hate them, but I was hurt. Deeply. And I wasn't ready to come back into their lives yet. That I needed time, space, to figure out if the relationship we'd always had was one I could keep carrying. They didn't write. Back right away. Weeks passed, then came a small box in the mail. No return address, but the handwriting was my mother's. Inside was an envelope, and inside the envelope was a folded photo. A picture I'd never seen before. Me and my grandfather. I was maybe 7 years old, sitting on his knee, a book open between us, his arm resting gently across my shoulder. We were both looking at the book, caught mid-sentence, unaware the camera was there. There was no note. Just that photo. I held it in my hands for a long time, my fingers trembling. I hadn't cried in weeks, but the tears came then, hot, sudden, relentless. Not because I missed them, or because I forgave them, but because for a moment, I remembered that I had been loved, truly, by someone who had seen me when I was still small, still forming, someone who had trusted me to know what to do with a gift, and who had, with that trust, given me something I could never unearn, no matter what anyone else did with it. It was a kind of healing I hadn't expected. And slowly, I felt something begin to grow in me, not forgiveness, not yet, but a softness. A beginning, not for them, but for myself. Spring came in quiet waves, soft and slow, like the sea pressing gently against the edges of the world. The air grew warmer, and sunlight poured longer through the windows of my new place, settling in corners like a familiar pet. I bought a chair for the balcony and used it every morning, sipping coffee and watching the world stretch itself awake. Something inside me was shifting. Something that had long been tight and knotted was finally loosening. I didn't move back. I didn't visit. But I didn't carry the same weight anymore. My pain had cooled into something less jagged. Not gone, not erased, but no longer ruling every thought, no longer echoing in every silence. The photo of me and my grandfather sat, on the little bookshelf by the window now, in a simple wooden frame. I looked at it each morning. I didn't smile at it, not always, but I acknowledged it. I let it be part of my new landscape. Daniel eventually reached out. It came as a message through social media, short, unsure, like someone testing the water before stepping in. He said he'd found out, that our parents had finally told him that money had come from me. He said he was sorry, that he didn't know, that he never would have taken it if he'd known, that he felt awful. I stared at the message for a long time, and I believed him. Not because I trusted him blindly, not because I was ready to let go of everything, but because I saw in his words the cracks of someone who had finally realized the luxury of never having to notice who holds up your world. I didn't absolve him. I didn't rush to reconnect. But I replied. I told him that I didn't hate him, that I hoped he was happy, that I hoped he used that trip for something more than photos, that maybe it had helped him grow the way I had. Grown, just in a different direction. He replied once more, and then we let it rest. I heard from my parents too, in small doses. A birthday card. An email about a neighbor who'd passed away. A picture of the maple tree in their yard, now with a new bench and fresh grass. They never asked me to come home. Maybe they finally understood that home wasn't something I could walk back into with a suitcase and a smile. Maybe they knew that what had been lost wasn't only money. It was a layer of trust that took years to build and a single decision to destroy. Still, I didn't cut them off completely. I allowed the thread to remain thin and quiet, like spider silk between branches. I wasn't ready to sever it, but I also wasn't ready to climb back across. Time passed. I planted flowers in pots on my windowsill. I started painting again. Late at night, music low and brushes moving without needing to impress anyone. I made new friends. I fell in love, slowly and gently, with a woman who listened like her life depended on it, and touched me like she'd never known anything softer. I told her everything one night in a whisper, and she held it like something sacred. Like I was sacred. That was the night I stopped feeling like a background character in my own story. I started thinking of the inheritance differently then. It wasn't a transaction anymore. It wasn't even a loss. It was a mirror. It had shown me everything I had needed to see. About them, about me, about the quiet ways we betray ourselves to keep others comfortable. It had stripped me of illusion and left me raw, but in that rawness I had built something honest, something whole. Didn't get the money back. I didn't get an apology big enough to wipe away the years. But I got myself. And now when I think of my grandfather, I don't think about the check or the lawyer's envelope or the zeros on that piece of paper. I think about his hand on my shoulder, the way he sat with me when I was 7 and didn't say much, but listened. The way he watched me read out loud, turning pages like they mattered, like I mattered. That was the inheritance, and no one could take that from me. Not ever.